Imagine losing your sight in a mysterious accident, then trusting a beautiful young wife to care for you, only to discover, too late, she's feeding you poison. What if the only person who could save you was your dead wife's ghost? Welcome to The Ghost Wife's Revenge, a scandalous Ghanaian drama you won't forget. In the heart of Accra, where the noise of traffic blended with the cries of hawkers and the glow of city lights never seemed to dim, lived Richard Mensah, a man whose name carried weight in both business and society. At 45, he was once the symbol of success, a shrewd investor, a property magnate, and a generous philanthropist whose influence stretched from East Legon to the very corridors of power. But fate had dealt him a cruel blow. Years earlier, Richard had been involved in a mysterious accident that robbed him of his sight. Doctors were baffled, whispering that the cause was strange, almost unnatural, and though he survived, the price he paid was total blindness. Through his darkest days, Richard found solace in the woman he loved most, Angela, his first wife. Angela was known in every circle as the epitome of devotion, standing firmly by her husband's side when the world turned its back. She cared for him with patience, guiding him through his new reality, shielding him from shame, and making him believe life could still hold meaning. Together, they built a sanctuary of love within the high walls of their East Legon mansion. But their happiness was short-lived. Angela's sudden death shook the city, raising questions no one dared to voice. Some said it was illness, others suspected something sinister. Richard never truly recovered. His blindness was now matched by the grief that weighed heavily on his heart. Months after Angela's burial, whispers began to follow Richard. People gossiped that a man of his wealth could not remain alone for long. The rumors were proven true when a new figure emerged in his life, a strikingly beautiful young woman named Cynthia. She was admired for her elegance, her polished looks, and the way she clung to Richard's arm in public, portraying herself as the perfect wife who had sacrificed her youth to care for a blind, grieving man. At social gatherings, Cynthia won the admiration of onlookers, laughing lightly, attending to Richard with exaggerated tenderness, and ensuring the cameras always caught her hand resting gently on his shoulder. But behind the closed doors of their mansion, a different reality unfolded. Cynthia was nothing like Angela. Where Angela had been warm and selfless, Cynthia was cold, calculating, and ambitious. She despised her husband's dependence on her and loathed the tedious life of guiding a blind man. Her true desire was not love, but power, control over Richard's empire, his wealth, and the freedom that came with it. With Angela gone, Cynthia believed she had the perfect opportunity to seize everything for herself. Richard, however, remained blinded not only by his condition but by misplaced trust. He could not see the subtle sneers on Cynthia's face when she served him food, nor could he sense the disgust in her eyes when she helped him dress. He believed every affectionate word she uttered, never knowing her heart burned with impatience, her mind already plotting ways to rid herself of him altogether. In the bustling city that adored appearances, no one suspected the truth. To society, Richard was fortunate to have found love again, and Cynthia was celebrated as the loyal young wife. But behind the gates of the Mensah mansion, a storm was brewing, one that would soon reveal secrets darker than anyone could imagine. The night was restless in East Legon. Heavy clouds gathered over Accra, and a violent storm swept through the city. The mansion of Richard Mensah stood in darkness, its tall gates rattling against the wind, its windows trembling under the weight of rain. Inside, Richard sat alone in his vast living room, surrounded by silence that felt heavier than the storm outside. Though he could not see, he had grown familiar with the rhythm of his house, the creak of the stairs, the dripping of water from the ceiling, the soft hum of the generator. Yet that night, something felt different. The air carried an unfamiliar chill, and his heart pounded with unease. As the wind howled, Richard thought of Angela, the woman who had once filled these halls with warmth. Memories of her presence haunted him, the sound of her laughter, the touch of her hand, the gentle way she had guided him through his blindness. Her absence had left a hollow void, one that even Cynthia's calculated affection could not fill. But the thought of Angela had never felt as real as it did that night. Then it happened. A faint voice echoed through the room, soft yet commanding, as though it had risen from the depths of memory itself. It spoke his name, stretching through the walls of his mind, trembling with sorrow. Richard froze. His body stiffened, his breathing shallow. He knew that voice. It was Angela. The storm outside raged harder as the atmosphere within the mansion shifted. The room grew colder, the air heavy with something unearthly. Richard felt a sudden warmth near him, as though unseen hands brushed his skin. Slowly, a glow began to take form in front of him. Though his eyes had long been useless, a strange sensation surged through his body, and for the first time in years, faint outlines of light broke into his darkness. It was as though his blindness had cracked. And within that glow, a figure emerged, Angela, clothed in white, her face sorrowful yet radiant. Richard trembled, unable to understand what was happening. But Angela's presence was undeniable. Her spirit hovered close, her eyes filled with love and pain. She was not merely a figment of memory, she was real. And with her touch, Richard's sight flickered into clarity. His world, once drowned in endless night, burst with a flood of light. He could see again, though only through her power. Tears welled in his eyes as colors and shapes returned after years of darkness. But Angela's return was not to comfort him. Her face carried a warning, a shadow of urgency. She revealed a truth that shattered what little peace Richard thought he had. Cynthia, the woman who pretended to love him, was slowly poisoning him. The meals, the teas, the soup she insisted he drank for his health were laced with death. Each day, his body grew weaker not from blindness but from Cynthia's carefully measured doses. Angela had returned to save him, not from loneliness, but from betrayal that would soon claim his life. Richard's mind spiraled with disbelief, pain, and fury. The woman who had replaced Angela in his bed was plotting his death, and the society that admired her devotion knew nothing of her cruelty. But Angela's ghost, bound by love even beyond the grave, had broken through the veil to warn him. She had given him back his sight, but only for a time, so he could see the truth with his own eyes and escape the fate his enemies planned for him. That night marked the beginning of a new battle in Richard's life. His blindness had once shielded him from the treachery around him, but now, with Angela's spirit by his side, he was about to uncover the darkest secret in his home. The following evening, the Mensah mansion glowed with deceptive calm. Outside, the garden lights flickered against the palm trees, and the sound of crickets carried through the humid Accra night. Inside, the polished dining table gleamed under the chandelier, set neatly with silverware and fine china. To anyone looking in, it was the portrait of elegance, but beneath the surface, danger brewed. Richard sat at the head of the table, his expression calm but his heart racing. Angela's ghostly presence lingered close to him, invisible to all but felt like a shield around his body. For the first time in years, he could see, not by human power but by the strength of his late wife's spirit. That borrowed vision revealed what his blindness had hidden, the deceitful hand of Cynthia. She glided into the dining room with her usual elegance, her silk dress rustling softly, her perfume filling the air. In her hands she carried a steaming bowl of light soup, its aroma rich with goat meat and fresh garden spices. To the untrained eye, it was a meal fit for a king, prepared with care. But Richard's borrowed sight caught what he had never seen before. Cynthia's hand had slipped something into the bowl, fine grains of powder, dissolving into the broth, vanishing from view as quickly as they had appeared. It was poison, subtle and carefully measured, the kind that killed slowly, leaving little trace. Richard's stomach turned, not from hunger but from the betrayal he now witnessed with his own eyes. Angela's presence whispered through his heart, guiding him to remain calm. The mask of blindness was his greatest weapon now. He forced his body to relax, to play the part of the helpless husband, unaware of danger. Cynthia set the bowl before him with a soft smile, her face a portrait of false devotion. She leaned closer, watching him, waiting for the first sip. Richard reached out, steady but deliberate, lifting the spoon toward his lips. The soup trembled in the silver spoon, the line between life and death balanced within it. Then, in a moment of silent cunning, Richard made his move. He let the spoon hover near his lips but lowered it again, feigning hesitation. With a subtle motion, he shifted the poisoned bowl away and, under the guise of clumsiness, drew the second bowl closer, the one Cynthia had prepared for herself. To the watching eye, it looked like nothing more than the fumbling of a blind man at dinner. To Angela, it was survival. Cynthia, eager to prove her deception, dipped her spoon into the very bowl she had poisoned. She tasted the soup herself, her smile triumphant as she urged Richard to do the same. But Richard, calm and patient, delayed every sip, pretending to blow on the hot broth, pretending to savor the aroma. Cynthia consumed more than she realized, each spoonful sealing her own fate. Minutes later, the shift was undeniable. The confidence on Cynthia's face faltered. Beads of sweat gathered on her forehead, her hand trembled, and her breathing grew shallow. The poison meant for Richard was now coursing through her veins. Her beauty, once her greatest weapon, contorted in panic as her body betrayed her. Richard sat still, his eyes fixed on her through Angela's gift of sight. He felt no triumph, only a wave of cold realization. The woman the world believed to be his devoted wife had tried to kill him, but fate had turned the table. Cynthia stumbled back, the bowl slipping from her hand, crashing to the polished floor. The soup spread across the tiles, its aroma now tainted with the bitter truth of betrayal. The mansion, once filled with silence, now echoed with the sound of her collapse. Richard remained seated, his chest rising and falling slowly. He knew that what had just unfolded was not the end, but the beginning of a scandal that would shake Accra to its core. And in the corner of the room, unseen by all but him, Angela's ghost stood watching, her eyes glistening with sorrow. She had saved him once again, but the storm outside the mansion was nothing compared to the storm about to erupt in the city. Accra awoke to whispers that spread faster than the morning trotro buses across the city. From the lively Makola market to the air-conditioned offices at Airport City, the news carried one shocking line: Cynthia Mensah, the glamorous young wife of Richard Mensah, had collapsed suddenly in her East Legon mansion. Ambulances had rushed her through the city's streets at dawn, sirens cutting through the still air, as onlookers gossiped and pointed. The woman who had once dazzled Accra's high society was now fighting for her life. The story traveled like wildfire, twisting with every retelling. Some said she had been poisoned by jealous rivals. Others claimed Richard himself, the powerful businessman blinded years ago, had orchestrated her downfall. And then there were the whispers, darker, more chilling, that the ghost of his late wife Angela had returned to haunt the marriage. The city loved scandal, and this one had every ingredient: wealth, beauty, betrayal, and death. As Cynthia lay unconscious in a private hospital room at Ridge, the accusations began. Her family, enraged and suspicious, pointed fingers directly at Richard. They painted him as a bitter, controlling man who had grown tired of his much younger wife. In the court of public opinion, the image of Richard as the helpless blind husband began to crack. For the first time, people questioned his innocence. But Richard was not silent. Guided by Angela's spirit, he revealed a truth that stunned the city. Hidden deep inside the mansion, Angela had led him to a small leather-bound diary tucked away behind Cynthia's vanity. Its pages, neat and elegant, were filled with chilling entries. Each note detailed Cynthia's slow plan: the herbs, the powders, the careful doses that would weaken him little by little until his death appeared natural. And then, written in her own hand, were the details of her escape. Dubai, first-class tickets, and a new life with the man she truly loved, not Richard, but a young banker named Daniel, who had been her secret companion all along. The scandal exploded. Newspapers splashed the story across their front pages. Talk radio hosts debated it endlessly, callers fueling the fire with their own theories. Social media turned Cynthia into both villain and victim, with some condemning her greed while others insisted she had been trapped in a loveless marriage. Daniel's name entered the storm, and though he disappeared from public view, his face soon leaked onto blogs and WhatsApp groups. The polished young man, once seen in Accra's elite banking circles, was now accused of being the shadow behind a plot to murder one of Ghana's most respected businessmen. Richard, though vindicated by the diary, was far from relieved. His reputation had been stained, his household turned into a circus for public scrutiny. Friends and business partners began to distance themselves, wary of the chaos surrounding his name. At the mansion, staff whispered of strange occurrences, doors opening on their own, shadows flickering in empty hallways. Some swore Angela's ghost still roamed the house, watching, protecting, and avenging. Cynthia's fate hung in the balance. Her body battled the very poison she had brewed for her husband, and though doctors worked tirelessly, her condition worsened. To society, it was poetic justice; to Richard, it was the tragic unraveling of a life built on lies. The city, intoxicated by the scandal, waited anxiously for the next chapter of the drama. Would Cynthia survive to face the shame of her betrayal, or would death claim her before she could confess? In the quiet of his mansion, Richard sat alone, his vision, restored by Angela's spirit, sharper than it had been in years. He knew the truth now. Cynthia had never loved him. Daniel had been the shadow in their marriage, the reason her eyes were always elsewhere, the reason her touch had always felt cold. And though the world outside speculated wildly, Richard knew that this story was far from over. For as long as Angela's ghost lingered, the storm of scandal would not rest. The mansion was silent again, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of truth exposed, of secrets dragged into the light. Richard Mensah sat in his study, the dim glow of a lamp casting long shadows across the walls lined with leather-bound books. For the first time in years, he could see clearly. Colors, shapes, and details that had been stolen from him were now restored by the hand of his late wife. The world outside his windows shimmered with life, yet his heart was heavy. Angela's presence still lingered, invisible to all but him. She had returned not for companionship, but for justice. It was her hand that had given him back his sight. Her whispers that had guided him through danger. Her spirit that had protected him from the slow, cruel death Cynthia had planned. But Richard knew nothing of this gift could last forever. News from the hospital soon reached him. Cynthia had succumbed to her own poison. The doctors, despite their desperate efforts, could not save her. To the public, it was the tragic ending of a beautiful young wife caught in the webs of wealth and ambition. To Richard, it was the inevitable fate of a woman consumed by greed and betrayal. Her family wailed, accusing him still, but the diary spoke louder than their tears. The scandal that had shaken Accra now settled into bitter truth: Cynthia had destroyed herself. But Richard felt no triumph. He thought of Daniel, the shadowy young banker whose name had stained his marriage. Though the man had vanished, whispers placed him hiding somewhere beyond the borders of Ghana, perhaps in Lagos or Dubai, his reputation ruined, his future uncertain. Richard's empire remained intact, but his soul carried scars no wealth could erase. That night, as the city of Accra slept, Richard felt the air in his study shift once more. A familiar warmth brushed against his cheek, and he knew Angela had returned. She stood before him in her flowing white cloth, radiant, sorrowful, and beautiful beyond the grasp of words. Her eyes glistened, not with anger, but with love. She had saved him, but now her mission was complete. Richard begged in his heart for her to stay, but Angela's gaze told him the truth. Spirits could not linger forever. She reached out and touched his face, her hand light as mist, her touch warmer than fire. At that moment, Richard's sight sharpened even more, the blur that had plagued him finally dissolving. His vision was restored, not temporarily, but permanently. This was her final gift. Tears slid down his cheeks as Angela's figure began to fade. The study grew colder, the glow that had filled it dimming into nothingness. Her farewell was silent, but her presence remained etched into his soul. She had loved him in life, and she had protected him in death. Now, she was free. The following morning, newspapers declared Cynthia's passing and closed the chapter with bold headlines. Society, ever hungry for scandal, quickly turned to new stories: but the memory of the ghost wife lingered in hushed conversations. Some swore Richard had been saved by divine intervention, others whispered of juju and restless spirits. But Richard knew the truth. Angela had come back for him, and because of her, he was alive. Standing on the balcony of his mansion, overlooking the bustling streets of Accra, Richard made a vow. He would honor Angela's memory for as long as he lived. He would build his life again, not in the shadows of scandal, but in the light of truth she had given him. And though the world would never truly know what had happened within those mansion walls, Richard carried the secret with him, that love, even beyond the grave, had the power to save a man's life. The ghost wife was gone, but her revenge, and her love, would never be forgotten. And that's how a blind husband regained his sight, exposed betrayal, and survived poison, all thanks to the ghost of the wife who loved him beyond death. If this story shook you, smash that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking Ghanaian dramas filled with twists, secrets, and supernatural justice. Your next favorite story is just one click away.